US President Joe Biden has begun his Asia tour, and all this while the White House has been primarily focused on tackling the fallout of the Russia-Ukraine war. And now, with fears of a North Korean nuclear test doing the rounds, this trip gains special significance. So what's on the agenda? We'll try and answer all this on this special broadcast of the WION-VOA Co-Production with me, Priyanka Sharma. And not just that, the US currently is also battling a crippling shortage of baby formula. So is there a plan in place to tackle this? We'll look at that too with the VOA correspondent. So let's get started and begin with President Biden's Asia tour. US President Joe Biden is now traveling to South Korea and Japan after hosting the Southeast Asian leaders at the White House last week. The administration's spotlight on Asia is a clear signal that the Indo-Pacific region remains its priority, even as it focuses on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The White House Bureau Chief Patsy Widakuswara from VOA is traveling with the president and has this next report. Take a look.
Following a two-day summit with members of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, U.S. President Joe Biden is heading to Seoul and Tokyo, despite a raging war in Ukraine, a signal that the Indo-Pacific remains the administration's priority and China its greatest strategic challenge. It's a synergy of Trans-Pacific and Transatlantic coalition building, said National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan.
And President Biden's unique capacity to actually stitch those two together is, I think, going to be a hallmark of his foreign policy.
In Seoul, Biden will meet the newly inaugurated South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol after a series of ballistic missiles tests by North Korea. Officials are racing for another launch while Biden is in the region. In Tokyo, Biden will participate in the Quad Partnership Summit with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and either Prime Minister Scott Morrison or his contender, Anthony Albanese, depending on who wins Saturday's Australian election. Biden will use the Ukraine crisis to signal to China that unilateral changes to the status quo by force, whether in Taiwan or the disputed islands in the South China Sea, are unacceptable.
The administration wants to make it very clear that there is strong support for Taiwan throughout the region and that there is tremendous capability there, as there has proven to be capability in the Transatlantic Alliance vis-a-vis Ukraine.
The Quad will also consult on the recent security agreement between the Solomon Islands and Beijing that has triggered fears of a Chinese military base in the strategic waters of the South Pacific.
It's been fundamental to Australia's view of its own security that hostile powers should not be able to project force against Australia from the Pacific.
In Tokyo, Biden will launch the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, the centerpiece of his administration's economic policy in the region since the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the free trade agreement that the Obama administration signed in 2016 and that the Trump administration withdrew from in 2017. There are scant details about the framework, but one thing is clear. IPEF does not include the free trade components that regional countries want. Despite several countries signaling interest in the framework, observers say this means the U.S. still lacks an attractive trade strategy to counter China's increasing economic clout. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News at the White House.
Joining us now for further analysis is VOA correspondent Jessica Stone. She is now joining us live from the White House. Jessica, welcome to WION. Now, my first question to you, just before President Biden left the White House for Asia, he met with the leaders of Finland and Sweden to support their application to join NATO. How much pressure does Washington face to lead in two separate parts of the world? And how is the White House essentially responding to this?
Well, they face a lot of pressure because, as you can see from the optics on Thursday when the president left, he literally walked off the dais after having met with the leaders of Sweden and Norway, sending documents to Congress to support their accession to NATO, and then got on a plane to go to Asia. So it's very clear that the White House is faced with an incredible challenge to continue to manage global expectation in this respect, and wants to send a consistent message that Washington's engagement in Asia is long-term, that they are not distracted by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And that is really a huge part of the purpose of taking this trip at this moment, right? The president wants to convey that he is very much active in the region. And of course, this is also very important after the Trump administration pulled out of such things as alliances and such things as the TPP. So an important message to send at this moment.
Right, Jessica, now as we know, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi will also be in Japan for the Quad Summit. What can we expect to be on the agenda for that meeting?
Well, the Quad Summit is really formed around natural disaster response initially, and now it's really working on climate change, pharmaceutical production and distribution, as well as infrastructure, and coordinating on critical minerals like those that go in batteries, cadmium, lithium, nickel. Experts say the Quad needs to create more infrastructure within the organization to particularly allow for work streams and non-competitive behavior inside the Quad. So, for example, on pharmaceutical production, making sure that India and Japan have equal access to opportunities to manufacture drugs that are happening within the context of the Quad. And experts also say that the Quad really is also going to provide a new platform for economic engagement. Take a listen to what this expert had to say.
Future. पहली फिजिकल क्वाड समिट की ऐतिहासिक पहल के लिए
Instead of talking about offshoring and instead of talking about reshoring, which is going to be very difficult and very time consuming for the US to do, we're now talking about friendshoring. Right? You can make your supply chains resilient if you are friendshoring, if you're sourcing from countries in which you know you can rely on under any geopolitical situation. So those are the types of things over the long term that can come out of the relationships you see being developed at the Quad.
Right, Jessica, thanks for those inputs. Stay with us on this broadcast. We'll talk about something else that, of course, is making headlines, the shortage of baby formula across the U.S. As we have been reporting, the U.S. government is scrambling to resolve a chronic shortage of baby formula nationwide. Now, this is impacting the poorest Americans. And the most important question is about whether Washington should stockpile formula as it does other critical supplies such as oil. VOA's Laurel Bauman has more.
Valerie Farnsworth is one of innumerable American moms now dealing with a severe shortage of baby formula. Her 5-month-old son Harrison has an allergy and can't tolerate breast milk, so she feeds him a specialty formula.
So not only can we not find it, but when we do find it, there's always a 20% markup on it.
For over a year, the U.S. has suffered from a baby formula shortage. Supply chain snags stoked the crisis, which was made worse when one of 3 companies that manufacture formula closed shop following a massive product recall. As of now, stores in the U.S. are stocking 43% less baby formula than normal, according to Data Assembly. This has mothers going from store to store looking for the product. Jordan Beltran couldn't produce milk for her first child, and she's afraid it will be the same with her second.
What if I can't produce milk and I need formula like today? Yesterday I went to Walmart and I just saw 1 can and I was like, I should just buy it just to be safe.
Experts remind us that for babies on formula, there's no other food option.
And I think we have to probably reevaluate what critical infrastructure really means. So we're, for example, we're keeping a strategic supply of crude oil and petroleum, but do we have critical strategic supplies of food items, baby formula?
The White House today was on defense, saying they have not failed to act.
And then we've been working with manufacturers, and that has resulted in Gerber increasing production by 50%, on Ricketts increasing production by 30%, and over the last 4 weeks, more production of formula than there was in the 4 weeks prior.
Meantime, doctors are warning parents not to make formula off internet recipes or buy it randomly online. Laurel Bauman, VOA News, Washington.
Now, to talk more about this crippling shortage of baby formula in America and what the U.S. has planned to tackle the same, VOA's Jessica Stone is still with us. Jessica, thanks for staying on. Is there any progress on getting more baby formula into the country as of now?
There is. The president, before he left on his trip, invoked what's called the Defense Production Act, which actually speeds up the prioritization of ingredients for baby formula in manufacturers. And so that will begin in this country. And then secondly, the U.S. government also reached a deal with the main manufacturer that had shut down production to restart production. And they're also going to begin flying in or boating in additional supplies that meet FDA standards here in the United States of baby formula.
Right, but Jessica, what about the idea of stockpiling infant formula? The U.S. does have a national petroleum reserve after all. So how likely is it to create an infant formula reserve? And how realistic is this?
Not very realistic at all. You know, when I looked into this question, what I found was that, yes, the U.S. has an oil reserve, and it used to have a grain reserve, but it's largely depleted that grain reserve during the 2008 financial crisis. It used that grain reserve to stabilize global grain prices, and it hasn't been replenished because the incentives aren't there for farmers. In terms of a political consensus, there's also a lack of political consensus that we even need such a reserve. So those are two reasons that we really need to see those things change around. And then, you know, even if there was a reserve of baby formula, it would still take time to create, and also it would take time to disperse into people's homes.
Right, Jessica Stone, thanks so much for all those insights, and thanks for joining us on this special production, of course, of the WION-VOA.